So this is a pretty cool project, and it's really easy for beginners and kind of nice for the advanced guys as well who kind of want a simple project. So definitely check this thing out because I think you guys are going to enjoy it. So we're going to be making a very simple bench. Now this bench is going to be kind of a combination of a butcher block style mixed with like a box joinery on the end. So on the two corners left and right, we're going to have that sort of box joinery, nice straight flat panel legs, and a nice straight flat panel top that are going to resemble a butcher block. And I'm going to show you guys how to make that from scratch as well. The best part about this project is that unlike a lot of my other projects, it is going to use some of the big box store lumber. So get on over there to the orange or blue place or whatever local store you have, get yourself some 2x4s, and let's get started. So the first thing you're going to need for this project is a bunch of 2x4s. Now I'm not sure exactly how many you're going to need because it's going to depend on the length and height of your project. But for myself, I have purchased 8 2x4s, and that's going to be more than enough. I'm actually going to have some waste. But I know I'm going to be cutting them to the certain dimensions and kind of milling these down a little bit, so I have to make up for that by having a little too much. The top of my bench is going to be just over 60 inches, and the legs are going to be around 18 inches. So I needed to make sure I have enough for that. So for the large parts on the top, the 60 inches, I'll have some cutoffs that I can use for the legs, and then I bought another couple of 2x4s to make sure that I have enough to make those legs as wide as I need them to. And again, I've probably bought too much, but do a little bit of math, figure out exactly how many you need. All right, let's quickly hit the tools you're going to need. So for this project, you are going to need a table saw if you want to get them straight and kind of rip them to a certain width, which I am going to do. You also want a chop saw, which is going to cut them to length. You want a drill and driver because we're going to be using a lot of screws in this project. And then I would highly recommend a thickness planer. Now these are not that expensive, so please don't complain in the comments. I happen to have one of the cheaper ones along with an extremely expensive large dual drum sander that I will not be using on this project. So I just want you guys to understand a thickness planer is a really good tool to have in your shop. I'm going to be using one so that I can make sure that every single one of my pieces is the exact same dimensions. It's kind of crucial to making this project easy to do, but it's not 100% necessary as long as you've got some really, really good boards. A couple of things like a tape measure, a pencil, probably a speed square so that you can make sure that everything is exactly 45 degrees when it's done, and a lot of wood glue. Preferably some clamps would be helpful, but the way that I've designed this project, you don't necessarily need them, but it would be nice to have on hand. And that's it. So let's go ahead and get started. So for starters, I'm going to go ahead and start milling the wood down. So I'm going to start with some big box store 2x4 studs. They're rounded on the ends, they're really ugly on the faces, and the sides are not straight at all. So I'm going to get the straightest pieces that I can even find at the store. Once I've got those, I'm going to rip them all in half first. The most crucial part is that whatever your measurements are, which should be around 3.5 inches wide, I'm going to rip them almost exactly in half, leaving me with one nice flat straight side and then a double rounded side on the other end. From there, after I've cut all my boards, I'm going to readjust my saw blade so that I have exactly 1 1/2 inches, okay? So the dimension of the thickness of the board will also be the width of the board. So laying the flat side of the board I just cut against the table saw fence, I'm going to run it through again, and I'm going to cut off that rounded garbage edge, and we can throw that away because we just don't need it for this project. From there, I now have a 1.5 by roughly 1.5 square long stock piece. I'm going to take all of these pieces over to my thickness planer and running them through one edge at a time. I'm going to run all 16 pieces through the planer so that I get a nice clean edge on the top, flip them over, do the left side, flip them over, do the bottom, flip them over, do the right side. Every time I'm going to adjust it by about a 1/32 of an inch. So by the time I'm done, I'll have just slightly shy of 1.5 inches total for the total dimension, but from top to bottom and left to right, it will be completely perfectly square. And that's what we want to get started on this project. Everything is cut square, I can actually go ahead and get started cutting them to length on my chop saw. So I'm going to measure out what I need for that, and we're going to get started cutting. So our plan is to do this. We're going to be making a butcher block, couple of pieces actually. The whole thing is going to be butcher block, but this top part is going to be 73 inches, and then it's going to be 15 inches deep. And the legs going down the side, these are going to be 18 inches tall. Now the way we're going to make this piece is actually pretty cool. We'll be putting these together by having sort of a jagged end on the end of the breadboard. And that's going to be each of the boards as we make them. We're going to leave some of the boards shorter than the other boards, and they're going to interlock with the boards on the leg to make kind of a, I don't know what this would be called, dovetail or box joint, but we're going to essentially end up making our joints using the width of the individual boards so that they meet together at the corner, and then we're going to cut and sand that and get everything nice and smooth and finish it up. This is actually going to be a super easy process. It just takes a little bit of planning ahead, but it makes for a nice and easy project, which I think you're going to like. Top dry fit, everything is cut, everything is looking good. Now it's time to get those leg pieces cut up. So to cut the legs, what I'm going to do is take my scrap pieces that I just cut off, and I'm going to kind of butt them up against each other, and then using a scrap piece, I'm going to make a square on that end that kind of lines up perfectly, and these will fit inside of those once everything's dimensioned up. The biggest thing to remember here is you always want to have a little bit, if you're gonna either have it perfect or have a little bit extra like that, that's the way to go, because this will end up getting shaved down when we're doing our final sanding. But my longer pieces now need to be 18 inches long, and the smaller pieces are going to be whatever that distance is. So I've completely dimensioned every single one of these pieces to be the exact same. So I can't give you that exact measurement because it's not exactly 1.5, it's just slightly less, but I'm going to fit those, get those fitting, and put everything together. We are almost there. So as you can see, I've got the pieces that I just cut. I actually ended up cutting only the longer pieces because from my scraps, I was only able to get 10 of the longer pieces and 1 of these shorter pieces. So I went ahead and dry fit those. They look good, but that means I still need to cut 11 more of these shorter pieces. But good news, I've got a little bit of scrap left over from the stuff I cut earlier. Now these are my reject boards, so I'm going to pick the straightest one, which is this one, and start with that. So starting with this one, I'm going to measure out and cut a couple of lengths out of here. I'll probably end up grabbing another one that's almost as straight as this, but I want to keep it the shortest lengths possible because I don't want to have to worry about the board having too much bow and causing a stress fracture in this product later on. So the dry fit is going well. I got everything put together. We've got a couple spots where the boards are bowing just a little bit, but because they're so thin, I should be able to put them in place when I do the laminate, and that'll work out pretty well for these boards. So I'm ready to move on to the next step, but I want to show you something really cool. So for this particular project, I'm not doing an actual laminate. Normally on butcher block projects, I would do, like you see behind me with the dining table here, where everything is laminated together with perfectly flat, stress-free joints. You clamp it up, I leave it clamped for about 12 hours, and then we take it apart. I also realized that a lot of you guys at home don't necessarily have the tools that I have here and aren't really experienced with doing laminations like that. So the way we're going to do this is to start on one of our outside pieces. I'm going to pre-drill about 4 holes down the side, and I'm going to drill a slightly bigger hole around the outer edge of the smaller hole. The smaller hole's for the screws to go through so it doesn't split the wood. The larger hole is going to be so that I can actually peg them with some dowel rods later for aesthetic looks, but we'll deal with that in a minute. So to actually do this, I'm going to take the outer piece and the one next to it, apply a little glue, slap them together, hold them down to my bench, and screw them together through the screw holes. Then I'm going to take the next piece in succession, I'm going to apply glue, push them together. From the opposite end, I'm going to pre-drill some holes and screw through those into the 2 pieces I just screwed together. So you have your bigger holes that we're going to put pegs in, screwed into this piece, and then I'm going this direction, adding on another piece with its own screws until I get to the opposite end. All the while, I'm going to be making sure that I'm using my leg pieces to make sure that my spacing is staying the way that I want it to be as I'm screwing together each piece. So it's a little bit tedious, but doing it this way is going to keep it nice and flat. It helps with the strength and holding everything together, and it's one way to do a laminate without having to use clamps and without having to, worry about everything being super uneven across this, 11 board wide butcher block. Centerpiece done. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but I was actually using another one of my scrap pieces. Once I got the first couple of spacings correct, I started butting them up against the ends to make sure that everything is going to still line up nice and straight. So when you're doing this, take your time and make sure that you're actually getting the straight corners and edges that you want, because once we make these legs here in a minute, they have to fit into those. So while this is all to the side drying, I'm going to make the legs. Now the legs are going to be a little bit easier because all you have to do is start with one of your shorter pieces and make sure that the butt ends line up perfectly straight, because that's going to be the part that's making ground contact. So imagine the leg is upside down. We're going to do the same process of screwing in the pieces from the side, and we're going to laminate the first two pieces short to long. Then going in from the other side, we're going to add another short, another long, another short. But you want to make sure that that top edge is nice and flat, because that's going to be our bottom, and if the jagged edge is not perfectly flat on the top side, that's okay, but all the short pieces are going to be the same length, so they're going to fit into there, and we can always sand off the excess later. There you have it. They are done. They are glued up. I used a little bit of heavier glue, and I was using Titebond 3, which is a really nice, strong, thick glue, but it does take longer to dry. And to make sure that I've got a nice, hard seal between all of the boards, I wanted to go ahead and leave it overnight. So I'm going to leave these for tonight and come back in the morning. So now these things are ready to be put together. I've got them nice and flat, I've got them sanded smooth, so I'm going to go ahead and attach my legs now. And the way I'm going to do that is by fitting the box joints that I made by cutting the boards to length in with one another. This is not going to be an exact fit, so don't get frustrated, but if you need to go through, clean some things up with a chisel a little bit, and then go ahead and fit those together, I'm going to be using a large masonry mallet that I made to just kind of finesse them into place. Once they're there, I'm going to square everything up and then add a couple of extra screws to make sure that it's all secure. Make sure to glue up your joints before you begin. That's going to help a little bit with lubrication to get everything in place, but it's also going to make sure that they fit nice and snug and are held together once that glue dries. So now it's time to start pegging. So I'm going to take these 3/8 inch dowel rods and I'm going to take a mallet and basically drive them into the holes with a little bit of glue. That's why I pre-drilled my holes with a 3/8 inch Countersink Bit. It's going to leave just enough room to stick these guys in there with some glue. I'm going to flush cut them off the top, and then we're going to go through and sand everything down, and it's going to make a nice finish and hide every one of those outer screw holes. Now that that's done, it's time to install the center support, which I already have. And what I've done is I measured 3.5 inches down from the top edge to the top edge, right? Top edge of your leg or bottom to the top or bottom edge of the stringer. So the stringer is now installed. Now I've got to measure the distance from the center up to the stringer and cut my pieces like this. Now, Because of the length, I've cut these at 47 degrees, and basically because I'm only cutting 2 of them instead of actually measuring through, I basically just went through and cut one edge, set it down, reached through and marked it, and then cut it at that point and just kind of fine-tuned it until now I can get it in and get a nice even flush fitting there. Once I get both of those cut, I'm going to find the center of my bench and mark it, and then put the 2 points so that they meet at that mark and go out to the stringer. So when I flip this thing over, you'll have a center point going down towards the outside. And I like that because that's going to provide a little bit of extra support for people sitting in the middle, and kind of help distribute that weight a little bit better. Putting those 2 pieces I just cut point to point, I'm going to have them centered and going out from the center to the stringer. I'm going to add some screws from underneath the stringer to hold them in place, and 2 pocket hole screws going in from underneath into the bottom of the butcher block, and those are going to hold everything together. Obviously put a little bit of glue on those joints to help make everything stronger, and that's going to help support more of the weight in the center of this bench. After that, I'm going to set this thing aside and let it dry overnight, come back tomorrow and do the rest of the sanding, start finishing it up. So here's a free tip for you. I'm gonna make this piece a little bit more rustic in its final finish, but I just spent a lot of time getting my butcher block nice and flat and smooth. I don't wanna ruin all of that. So to get all the nubs down and to get all the pegs shaved down and get everything smoothed out, I'm going with an 80 grit on my belt sander. Now that leaves nice deep grooves. So what I'm trying to do is stay with the wood grain, get everything smoothed down, but instead of moving up progressively, which you should do if you want a nice smooth finish, I'm gonna go from the belt sander at 80 grit directly to a 240 grit on my orbital sander. And that's going to smooth everything out so it's smooth to the touch, but when you go to put your stain on, the stain is going to get into those deeper grooves that you can't really see, so you'll visually see all of those grooves and all those scratches, but you won't be able to feel them when you put your hand over it. So it's a nice trick that I've started doing on a lot of these more rustic pieces. In the always noisy finishing room. So I have got the seat over here, and it is got its first coat of polyurethane on it, but before I move any farther, I want to go ahead and add these adjustable feet to it. The reason that I do that is because even though my dead flat table is exactly that, it's dead flat, it's perfectly flat all the way across, my floor in here isn't perfect, but it's really close for a concrete floor, but the client's is almost never flat, and so to compensate for that and just to add a little bit more professionalism to this, I get these little guys. They're dirt cheap, which is pretty awesome, but they've got a nice heavy-duty rod on the back of them and a felt pad on the bottom, and then I picked these up as well, which these are little pieces that you can drill out for the peg there, and you can hammer them in so they bite, and then one screws into the other, and you now have a fully adjustable foot. So these are a really nice touch, and a lot of people really like them. It also just kind of helps to actually level the piece when I bring it into the client's house. If I set it on the floor and it's rocking a little bit, I can quickly do a little twist, and it's perfectly good, versus having to try and figure out the high spots and low spots in their floors. So I'm going to show you how to attach these real quick, and then I'm going to get the second coat of polyurethane on this bench, and hopefully get it out the door here in the next couple days. I know I say this pretty much every time, but this project turned out awesome. If you're building this thing at home, this is a fun way to do some butcher block that you don't necessarily have to have the laminating skills just yet. It's a nice entry-level way to make something this flat and this pretty, and then later on you can kind of learn the actual techniques of proper lamination and using dominoes and dowels and whatnot. If this is too thin of a surface, like if you've got an 8-foot table and you need a longer bench than the one that I made, it might be too thin and it might flex and bow a little bit in the middle. What I would recommend is very simply taking a 2x4, flattening one side, cut it to length, and then pre-drill a couple of holes and screw it up in underneath just inside the outside edge. That'll give you a nice apron and make this thing a little bit stronger to support a little more weight over a larger span. The size that I built doesn't really need that, so I didn't do it on this project. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope this inspired some people to get out there and start building some of this really pretty stuff on their own. If you'd like, go ahead and check out my DIY projects playlist. I've got a lot of cool stuff in there from a couple years ago up until now, and you can get some inspiration or just build one of the projects based on one of my really long and boring descriptions of how to do it. Find me on social media, check me out on there, and definitely check out livingwaterboardco.com. It is for my custom-made skateboards. Got my logo on my jacket right here. Definitely check that out. I'm trying to get some skateboards and some pins and cutting boards and things that I make out there. So check that out, give me a little bit of traffic, and hey, maybe order yourself a Christmas gift. And with that, guys, I'm gonna go inside and enjoy my weekend, so you guys have fun, build some stuff, and definitely tag me or email me or let me know if you do one of these projects, because I absolutely want to see it. We'll talk to you guys next time. See ya!